Hello, friends. Night shifts are inherently unsettling. When the rest of the world goes to sleep, a small fraction of the population stays awake to keep society running. Most of the time, it's just boring, a battle against sleep deprivation. But every now and then, the isolation of the night creates the perfect environment for something deeply disturbing. Tonight, we look at 3 supposedly true horror stories from people who work the night shift, encounters so terrifying they force them to hand in their resignations the very next day. Our first story comes from a viewer named Marcus. Back in 2021, Marcus worked as a solo night security guard for a massive logistics and distribution warehouse located in an industrial park just outside of Chicago. His shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. For the most part, the job was incredibly easy. He sat in a small security booth at the main gate, monitored a wall of CCTV cameras, and did a walking patrol of the interior once every 2 hours. For the first 6 months, nothing happened. But on a freezing Tuesday night in November, that changed. It was around 2:45 a.m. Marcus was sitting in his booth, scrolling through his phone, when a massive semi-truck pulled up to the gated entrance. This was immediately unusual. The warehouse didn't accept deliveries after 9 p.m. unless it was pre-scheduled, and Marcus's log sheet for the night was completely blank. Marcus stepped out of the booth into the bitter cold and walked up to the driver's side window. He knocked on the glass. Inside the cabin, the light was off. The driver slowly rolled down the window. Marcus described the man as looking incredibly disheveled. He had wild, unblinking eyes, a pale complexion, and a strange, fixed grin on his face that didn't match the late-night vibe at all. Marcus asked the man for his delivery manifest. The driver didn't say a word. He just stared straight ahead, his grin widening, and then slowly pointed a finger toward the back of his truck. Marcus, feeling incredibly uncomfortable, stepped back and looked at the trailer. It was a standard, unmarked, white shipping container. He told the driver that without paperwork, he couldn't open the gate and that he would have to turn the truck around. The driver didn't argue. He didn't even blink. He simply rolled the window back up, threw the truck into reverse, and backed out of the facility entrance, disappearing into the dark, foggy road. Marcus walked back into his heated booth, shaken but relieved. He chalked it up to a weird encounter with a tired truck driver. About an hour later, at 3:45 a.m., it was time for Marcus to conduct his scheduled walking patrol inside the main warehouse building. The warehouse inside was massive, filled with towering rows of metal shelving loaded with pallets. The lights were kept on a low-energy night setting, leaving the corners of the building cast in deep shadows. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and stepped inside, locking the heavy metal security door behind him. The only sound was the distant hum of the HVAC system and the echo of his own steel-toed boots on the concrete. He walked down row after row, shining his flashlight into the dark gaps. Everything seemed normal until he reached the very back of the facility, near the emergency exit doors. That's when he noticed something that made his stomach drop. One of the heavy fire doors was pushed slightly ajar. A piece of thick cardboard had been jammed into the latch, preventing it from locking. Marcus approached the door cautiously. He pushed it open and shined his light outside into the gravel lot. Nobody was there, but then he looked down at the concrete floor just inside the door. There were wet, muddy footprints leading away from the door and directly into the warehouse aisles. Marcus immediately realized someone was inside the building with him. He unholstered his radio to call his supervisor, but before he could press the button, he heard a sound echo from a few aisles over. It was the distinct, unmistakable sound of a heavy metal pallet shifting. Marcus froze. He turned off his flashlight to avoid giving away his position, letting his eyes adjust to the dim, shadowy twilight of the warehouse. He whispered into his radio, explaining the situation and asking for police dispatch. His supervisor told him to get out of the building immediately and wait in the security booth. Marcus began to quietly retrace his steps toward the front exit. He walked flush against the metal shelving, trying to be as silent as possible. But as he passed aisle 14, he stopped dead in his tracks. Standing right in the middle of the aisle, about 20 feet away, was a man. Even in the dim light, Marcus recognized him instantly. It was the driver from the truck. He wasn't stealing anything. He wasn't looking around. He was just standing completely still in the dark, staring directly at Marcus, wearing that exact same terrifying, unblinking grin. And in his right hand, he was holding a long, rusted crowbar. Marcus didn't say a word. He turned and sprinted as fast as he could toward the front security doors. As soon as he started running, he heard the heavy, frantic thudding of boots chasing after him, accompanied by the terrifying sound of the crowbar scraping aggressively against the metal shelving as the man ran. Marcus made it to the front door, slammed it open, burst outside, and locked it from the exterior. He ran all the way to his security booth, locked himself inside, and watched the CCTV monitors with a pounding heart. A few minutes later, the police arrived. They searched the entire warehouse, but the man was already gone. He had slipped back out through the propped open emergency exit. When they checked the perimeter, they found the unmarked white semi-truck parked in a hidden dirt turnout just a quarter mile down the road. The engine was still running, but the cab was completely empty. When the police opened the back of the trailer, they didn't find cargo. They found a sleeping bag, several sets of handcuffs, and a collection of cameras. The man hadn't been making a delivery. He had been scouting the location, waiting for Marcus to be alone. Marcus quit his job the very next morning. He never went back to the warehouse, not even to pick up his final paycheck. He had it mailed to him. Our next story takes place at a 24-hour gas station located off a lonely stretch of highway in rural Oregon. It was submitted by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous, but we'll call him David. David was a college student who took a night cashier job to help pay for his tuition. The store was usually dead between the hours of 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Most nights, David would just clean the coffee machines, restock the coolers, and study behind the counter. It was a tedious job, but it paid well due to the hazard hours. However, David quickly learned why those hazard hours were necessary. One rainy Tuesday night, around 2:15 a.m., an old, rusted sedan pulled up to the pumps. A man got out, dressed in a heavy yellow raincoat with a hood pulled down low, completely obscuring his face. The man walked into the store. The little bell above the door chimed. David gave his standard greeting, "Welcome in." The man didn't respond. He walked directly to the back of the store where the drink coolers were located. David watched him on the overhead mirrors. The man stood in front of the glass doors for a long time, at least 5 minutes, just staring at the drinks without opening the door. Eventually, the man grabbed a single bottle of water, walked up to the counter, and placed it down. David scanned it and told him the total. The man slowly reached into his raincoat pocket, but instead of pulling out a wallet, he pulled out a small, crumpled piece of lined notebook paper and pushed it across the counter toward David. David looked down at it. Written on the paper in messy, erratic handwriting were the words, "I know what time you walked to your car." David felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He looked up at the man, trying to keep his composure. He asked, "Is this a joke?" The man didn't say anything. He slowly raised his head, revealing his face from underneath the hood. David said the man looked deeply unstable. His eyes were completely bloodshot, and he had a terrifyingly vacant expression. The man slowly grabbed the water bottle, turned around, and walked out of the store without paying, leaving the note on the counter. David watched him get back into his car and drive away into the darkness. Naturally, David was terrified. He immediately called the local police line. A deputy came out about 20 minutes later, took a statement, and looked at the note. The deputy told David that it was likely just a local transient trying to scare him, but promised to keep an eye on the area for the rest of the night. For the next 2 hours, David felt a bit safer, but the feeling didn't last. At around 4:30 a.m., the rain started pouring down even harder. David was in the middle of mopping the floors near the entrance when he looked out the large glass storefront windows. The gas station pumps were brightly lit, but beyond the perimeter of the overhang, the darkness was absolute. As David looked out into the rain, he noticed something standing just at the edge of the light, near the wood line at the border of the property. It was a figure, standing completely still in the pouring rain, without an umbrella. David walked closer to the window and squinted. It was the man in the yellow raincoat. He was just standing there in the dark, staring directly through the glass at David. David immediately dropped his mop and ran behind the counter to grab the landline phone to call the police again. But as he picked up the receiver, the store's power suddenly cut out. The entire store went pitch black, except for the emergency backup lights, which cast a dim, eerie red glow over the aisles. Then, David heard the front doorbell chime. The man had entered the store. David hid beneath the cash wrap counter, pressing his back against the cabinets. He was trembling violently. He could hear the wet, squelching sound of the man's heavy boots walking slowly across the freshly mopped floor. Squelch, squelch, squelch. The footsteps stopped right on the other side of the counter. David held his breath, terrified that the slightest sound would give him away. Then, he heard the man whisper in a cracked, raspy voice, "You're late for your car." David heard the man begin to drag something sharp across the top of the Formica counter. Suddenly, the loud, piercing sound of a police siren echoed from the highway outside. The deputy who had taken the report earlier had decided to circle back to check on the store. The footsteps instantly accelerated, moving rapidly toward the back of the store. A moment later, the sound of the rear emergency exit door slamming open echoed through the building. The deputy entered the store with his flashlight drawn, finding David shaking underneath the counter. When they inspected the counter, they found deep, aggressive gouges carved into the wood from a hunting knife. The man was never caught. The police found his sedan abandoned a mile down the road. It had been reported stolen 3 days prior. David walked out of the store that night, left his keys on the counter, and texted his manager that he was quitting effective immediately. He now refuses to work any job that requires him to be alone after dark.